Alright, let's get started learning some of the different selection tools that Photoshop has to offer. First of all, we're going to start by creating a new document by going to File and down to New. And let's set our dimensions not in pixels but in inches. And we want to make it 7 inches wide by 10 inches tall. Since we're printing it out, we want it to have about 300 dpi for the resolution. And for our color mode, the best color mode to work in for something that will be printed is not RGB, but CMYK. Everything else can remain the same, and we'll hit OK. The first thing we need to do is open up a background image. So let's go to this week's pictures and choose the background JPEG. I'm going to click and drag it into Photoshop. So now that we can see both of them, what I want to do is to be able to select the pixels on this image and copy and paste them over into our new document we've created. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this, but today we're going to be learning our selection tools. So let's look over in our text in our toolbox and find the second tool that's in your toolbox. And this is called the Rectangle Marquee. And if you don't see it, remember you can click and it'll give you a pop-out of some different selection tools we can choose from. The first one is the Rectangle Marquee, and with it selected, let me show you what it does. I'm going to go back to my starry background JPEG. This will allow us, when I click and drag, it'll start creating a square. And that square will have this kind of dotted moving line. It looks like marching ants, and a lot of people actually call that line a marching ants or a dotted line marquee. But when I make a selection, it's telling Photoshop to only look at the pixels that are within that selection. When I let go, everything is in a squared off, a rectangular shape. I can move it around by clicking inside of it and moving it to where I want it to go. If I was to accidentally click outside of it just once, it'll go away. So what I want to be able to do is to select the entire selection of this document. So I'm going to click in the upper left-hand corner and drag down to the bottom right-hand corner. There we go. With everything selected, I'm going to go to Edit and Copy. Then I'm going to go over to my new document that I've created and go to Edit and Paste. And it's pasted in those pixels into our new document. With that done, I can go ahead and just close out our background JPEG that we had open. If it asks you to save, there's no need to do that, so we're going to hit Don't Save. So with it pasted in here, I now have these pixels to work with. The next thing I want you to notice is our layers palette. So let's look over. It's usually located at the bottom right-hand corner of our screen. We now have two different layers in this palette. Before we only had just the background layer, and you can see it has a little white area. On top of it is layer 1, and that's what the starry background layer we just pasted in was pasted into. Whenever you copy or cut and paste something into a document, Photoshop pastes it onto another layer. So be careful what layer you're working with. Let's kind of have a look at some of the things that make up the layers palette. First of all, there's a little eye next to any image on the layer you're working with. In order to see what's on that layer, you can click on the eye, and if you look at our document, it's turned off everything that's on that layer. So you can kind of tell what's on there and how to get rid of it simply by clicking on the eye. If I was to click again on that square, it turns it back on. Let's look at what happens when we turn off the background. It gives us a checkerboard pattern. That's because the last layer in Photoshop when you're working is always the background layer. It's the color of your paper or the color that you want on the very bottom of your document. Usually by default it's white, but sometimes you can have it transparent if you need to. I'm going to turn it back on and turn on our layer 1 option. Let's add one more layer to here. The next document to open up will be our moon JPEG. So let's drag it down to Photoshop, and it gives us this moon texture. What I want to be able to do is to copy and paste this texture into our starry night to have a moon feel to it. So let's go back over to our toolbox and click and hold and select our elliptical marquee. Going back to the moon, I want to be able to select a circle of this texture. If I was to click and drag and pull out, you can see that it creates a circular form of marching ants. And actually it's an ellipse. It can be tall or it can be skinny. If I hold down my Shift key, just like in Adobe Illustrator, it gives us a perfect circle. If I was to hold down my space bar, I can move my selection around. And it doesn't change the shape that I'm working with, but it will allow me to adjust where my shape is being positioned at. So holding my space bar, let's move it over to the edges and the top. I'm going to hold down my Shift key again and get a perfect circle. And when I release, you see I've got a rounded selection of pixels. Again, everything inside of that is what I'll be selecting from. And I can click inside here and move my selection around a little bit. I'm going to go to Edit and Copy. Go over to my new document and go to Edit and Paste. And now I've pasted in that circular selection that I've made. Let's go back to our Layers palette, and you'll notice that the moon is now on layer 2, which is a good thing because I want to be able to move my moon around without actually affecting anything that's on my background layer or my starry layer, which is on layer 1. In order to move something around on one layer, first of all, let's choose our black arrow tool, which is always the first tool in our toolbox. We'll click it once. And for the sake of these tutorials, let's look up in our tool options box and let's turn off auto select. And let's also turn off the show transform controls. We won't be needing those for this project. So both of those are unselected. And I'm on layer 2. You know layer 2 is active because it's highlighted in blue. With my black arrow, I'm able to click and drag and move things around on my document. And I can place the moon up in the sky anywhere that I want. So I can place it right there. If I was to click on layer 1 and have it highlighted and then go back and start to click and drag around, it would move everything only on that layer. Notice that the moon is staying still this time. But I don't want that. I want it to stay perfectly where it is. If I was to click on the background layer, let's see what happens when I click and drag. It gives us an error. It says you couldn't complete this because this layer is locked. So we're going to hit OK. The background layer is almost always locked in position. You can't move the pixels around. You are able to paint on them and draw and make selections, but you're not able to make any movements from them. Only the regular layers that we'll be working on, layer 1, 2, or 3, can be changed up. So you can click them around and move it to any place that you want. If having your layers named 1, layer 2, and every time we paste something on there a number gets a little confusing, you are able to rename your layer that you're working on. To do this, the easiest way is to simply click once on the layer name, double click on the layer name, and it'll highlight it. Now I can type in any layer that I want. So I'm going to call this Stars Layer. And when I click off, it saves it. And let's rename layer 2, so I'm going to double click on the name and call this Moon Layer. And when I hit return, that's the layer that I have on there.